So I've always found Margaery to be the most enigmatic or opaque character in A Song of Ice and Fire. There's a lot of different ways of looking at her, and it's made more kind of, like I said, opaque because we don't get a point of view chapter from her perspective, obviously. And Martin has said there won't be any new characters giving point of view chapters. So her internal thoughts will probably forever be a mystery to us. So why do I say she's enigmatic? I should note that book and show Margaery are pretty different. They both have similar traits in common, but I find book Margaery comes off as more the innocent maid, and show Margaery comes off as more of being the kind of Machiavellian master politician manipulator. The truth is probably somewhere between the two of them. But within Margaery, we have a couple different perspectives. We have how Cersei views her as being a manipulative trollop who's trying to rise up and overthrow her and take her place. And Cersei sees her as a master manipulator and someone who's completely dishonest with the way she behaves. Sansa, if memory serves, sees her as a noble and, generally speaking, good person. While Sansa has some doubts about her, she definitely has a much more positive view of her than she does of Cersei. We don't get a Tommen point of view chapter. So, with Margaery, I guess there's kind of two main schools of thought you can take a look at her. There's one that she largely is who she says she is. She is naturally kind, she's a family person, she has genuine concern and love for the small folk, and that her charitable activities aren't cynical. She actually wants to make their lives better. At least some of her displays of piety are not feigned, that she actually is religious to a certain extent. As to her chastity, we don't really know, but it should be noted that the only people we have, in the books at least, that indicate she's sleeping around are Pycelle and Cersei, neither of whom are particularly trustworthy. Cersei is an unreliable narrator to the point of being psychotic, and Pycelle is a lickspittle who would lie and sell his own mother if he thought it would make Tywin give him a smile. So we don't really know. In the show, it seems a bit more that she's a bit more promiscuous, but in the books, we have no idea because, and I hate to repeat myself, but the people we have who see her are either unreliable narrators or see a very small part of her. We don't get any real insight into her private thoughts. Even for characters who aren't POV like Robb Stark, he's fairly candid with Catelyn or Ned, so we can get a much better view of what's inside of him. So we have these two contrasting pictures of Margaery Tyrell. One is an expert player of the Game of Thrones who's able to fool everybody around her, who's completely disingenuous in all of her actions, whose displays of piety or compassion or charity are entirely undertaken to gain power, and that she's in many ways just as ruthless and just as evil as, say, Cersei or Tywin was. The other view is, like I said, that she has a certain romanticism to her, a certain innocence to her, that she's not promiscuous, that at least some of the way she presents herself is what she's actually like, and that she kind of largely is who she says she is. So which perspective do I think is the true one? What is the real Margaery Tyrell? Is it kind of more the book view, which is more ambiguous but less Machiavellian, or the show view, who's much more of a ruthless social climber? Personally, I think it's both. And I think what's really important, and this is something a lot of people don't understand, is that people can have multiple motivations for doing things. In fact, if you're intelligent, you probably do have multiple motivations for doing stuff. Like, let's view working, for instance. Okay, you gotta eat to live, so you need to work to eat. Also, for a lot of people, having structure and kind of a purpose, like getting up in the morning, is good for them mentally and physically. It's good for their health. Maybe you enjoy your job. Maybe you think your job is making a difference. Like, let's say you're a doctor. Okay, you make good money. That's number one. Number two, you are helping people. Number three, like I said, it provides structure and meaning to your life. Number four, maybe it boosts your ego because you have power over life and death. And you can go on and on and on. You're also feeding your family. Maybe you want to have certain luxury goods. The point is, people's motivations are not necessarily singular. They can have multiple motivations, and these motivations aren't mutually exclusive, nor are they necessarily contradictory. Margaery Tyrell could very easily be compassionate and have real concern and enjoy doing charity, but also be a social climber. There's nothing inherently wrong with ambition. It depends what you do to gain power. And if you are naturally compassionate, then your way of gaining power probably should leverage that. You have to play to your strengths. So there's nothing, like I said, there's nothing mutually exclusive with her with saying, okay, she generally wants to help the small folk, and B, she sees that as a way of gaining popular support. The Starks frequently do that. The Starks honor, and oftentimes their harshness comes from the fact that they want to be that way. At the same time, as a friend of mine said, if you look at the North, the Starks have almost 100% approval rating. Their bannermen are fanatically loyal to them. And this is to a large extent because the Starks are such honest, fair, just people. So there's not really a mutually exclusive group of motivations there. Ned Stark is naturally honorable and naturally does the things he wants because that's the way he is as a person. But at the same time, it has the effect of making his bannermen fanatically loyal to him. So like I said, they aren't... You can have these complicated motivations. You can have both altruistic and selfish motivations at the same time. The fact is, when we have some characters like Cersei who are very one-dimensional in their motive. Cersei's not a one-dimensional character, but her motivations are entirely selfish and malicious. So I think when you're looking at Margaery and at a lot of the characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, you have to keep that in mind. Well, some of them are more cynical, like, say, Tywin or Cersei or Roose Bolton, who are largely in it just for themselves. You also have characters who have more mixed motivations. Tyrion is naturally kind, and he naturally does have compassion for people. At the same time, he is very self-indulgent and very proud in his own way. Same thing with Ned. Ned has a very strong sense of justice. At the same time, he's extremely prideful in his own way and extremely self-absorbed. And maybe I'll do another video on Ned Stark to kind of go into that. But it's important to keep in mind that, yeah, you can have these complex motivations and there's nothing mutually exclusive about them. And I think it shows that Margaery's a much better player of the game than any of the Lannisters are. Cersei, despite her winning, sometimes is an utter failure at the Game of Thrones. In the show, her blowing up the Great Sept of Baelor is not a victory. In a lot of ways, it's an admittance of her defeat. She can't salvage the situation, so the best thing she can do is just to blow everything up. And in doing that, she kills her most competent military commander, Kevin Lannister. She kills Margaery. She kills the Tyrells, who have the largest army in Westeros, which was still largely intact. And she succeeded in basically alienating the realm, seizing the throne despite her having zero legitimacy, and nobody outside of the Crown lands in the West follows her. Like I said, losing their major alliance and killing most of the people who could have helped her at that point in time. Even though she technically kind of won, it was an admittance of defeat. Much like how executing Ned Stark was kind of a win for House Lannister, and they did win the Civil War, but in winning the Civil War, they were left to rule a kingdom of ruins in which their armies had been virtually wiped out, and in which they were set with debts that they could never hope to repay. So, if anything in Game of Thrones, I think it shows that you need a mixture of both. If you're going to be a complete sociopath and just kill everything in your path, it comes back to bite you eventually. There is a strong sense of karma in the series. I know it doesn't always seem that, but Cersei's constant betrayals in both the show and books has left her without any friends, without any allies. Kind of like Hitler in his bunker at the last days, alone with a bunch of suck-ups and lickspittles who have very little in the way of talent and are just there to mooch off of her. And her desire to keep appointing yes men leads to her downfall on numerous occasions. Ramsay's constant double dealing and backstabbing of everybody leads him to have a couple victories. At the same time, though, everybody in the North basically hates him at this point and is waiting for the first chance they get to overthrow the Boltons. You do reap what you sow in A Song of Ice and Fire eventually. It can just take a little while. The Father's justice is slow, but it always comes. So I think characters like Margaery, who have kind of a more balanced view of how to play the game, to notice that you ambition is not necessarily bad, but you have to kind of keep your soul as doing it, is probably the most successful long term. They can lose, as she loses in the show, but her loss is because of Cersei's insane kamikaze scorched earth policy that has left her very vulnerable. If the Tyrells had have still been loyal to the Lannisters, they probably could have just curb-stomped Dany. Dany wouldn't have been a threat. The Tyrells' excellent heavy cavalry and wealth meant they could have just annihilated the Dothraki. They would have still had the Red Wine fleet, and they could have, and along if they could get the Greyjoys to come on board also. Dany's forces would not pose much of a threat. But like I said, she completely screwed that one up. So hopefully that kind of made sense. Hopefully that kind of gave you a bit of insight into karma and cause and effect within A Song of Ice and Fire. Hope you enjoyed the video, and more to come.